To call our final budget session to order. At the conclusion of today's meeting, we should have a budget, and then following that, we'll have a special council meeting to approve the budget. So I need a motion to reconvene into open session. Councillor Harris, Councillor Fox, and all those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Okay. Opening remarks. I'd just like to share with you, as per tradition here at the region, that the last time we met, we had I think a final position of approximately 3.7, including police, for a tax increase. And the committee chairs met, and I have also done a straw poll of most of the council members, and there seemed to be a sense throughout those communications and here during our budget deliberations that we would really like to achieve a tax increase that is less than 3%. And so the committee chairs have met and have taken that under consideration, and with support from staff, have come up with a recommendation that's in front of you that will bring us to 1.97% for region, plus an additional percentage for police, which would bring us in with a total of 2.97. So of course, we're going to have to, later in the meeting, go through the issue papers and go through those recommendations. Committee will have a chance to ask questions and make some suggestions and potentially some other changes. But that is the direction that I've been given and that I've heard throughout this process. And the committee chair's recommendations will be there for us to discuss later on in the meeting. And before we get there, of course, there's some other staff updates, some that affect our budget, some things that are changing or potentially changing with respect to provincial legislation that we should be all aware of. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Dyer and Mr. Murray to kick off the staff presentation. Mr. Murray.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be brief. I just want to take an opportunity to make a couple of introductory comments. First, I just want to thank all the staff who've been involved. Staff have been working on this budget since last fall. Council's been engaged in it since, I think, shortly after inauguration in December. But the whole senior management team has been actively engaged in working on the budget, and I really want to thank in particular Craig and Cheryl for all the work that they've done, and in particular Craig over the last weekend, because I think it was a busy weekend. Big kudos to the whole team. Back on our first budget day, you may or may not recall, I did some opening comments on that day, and this was one of the slides. I noted that there's always unique challenges in every budget. This year there were probably 4 sets of challenges that we were dealing with: base budget pressures, infrastructure funding, significant service enhancements, and a bit of a cloud of uncertainty. And so those were the challenges back in December. They continue to be challenges, and I'm just going to do really quick updates on each of those challenge areas, really to encourage you to keep some things in mind as you go through your final deliberations today. So, through this budget process, we've dealt with a number of base budget pressures. A lot of things putting upward pressure on the base, things like annualization of significant service enhancements in 2018, service contracts going up in cost, utilities, fuel, a number of things driving the base budget up. And to help deal with that, staff did a lot of work early in the process through late last year to try to find base budget reductions. And you'll recall early in this year's budget process, we talked about the base budget reductions, and staff once again identifying a little over $2 million in base budget reductions that help reduce some of those pressures and help create some capacity for council to deal with some of the things that you're likely to deal with today. And if you look back over the last 5 years, a little over $12 million of base budget reductions that staff have identified through our annual, line by line, real roll up the sleeves hard work that the whole management team engages in every year. So I just wanted to note that as a way to deal with some of the base budget pressures. Infrastructure funding. You've heard a lot about infrastructure funding through this budget process. We're about to embark on a strat planning process. You'll hear more from me and from Craig and from Thomas about infrastructure funding challenges. And I would say this community is in the semi-unique position of having to deal with two sets of infrastructure funding challenges. We continue to need to build new growth-related infrastructure. As the community grows, residential development, employment growth, we need new growth-related infrastructure, and I think we've explained over the years that development charges do not totally cover the cost of that growth-related infrastructure. So there's one pressure. The other pressure, at the same time, we've got about $4 billion worth of existing infrastructure that needs significant maintenance, renewal, replacement, and I think hopefully, Craig has explained clearly over time, there is not enough annual funding in our operating budget to fund all of that infrastructure maintenance, renewal, and replacement needs. We're relying significantly on debt financing, basically to fix the roof. We're taking out mortgages on our property to fix the roof, and that is not a good sort of management practice, not a good operating practice. As Craig would say, it's not good debt. And so we've got an infrastructure funding deficit somewhere in the range of $40 to $50 million per year. And really the only way that this organization and other municipalities are going to sort of dig ourselves out of that hole is through annual incremental increases to infrastructure funding, state of good repair, asset renewal funding. And so my really strong encouragement to you as you finalize today's budget, there is some incremental funding included for asset renewal, included in the base budget that you're dealing with. And my strong encouragement to you is, continue to support that incremental funding that is in that base budget. It is in the 2.97% that Chair Strickland referred to. Service enhancements. I suspect today you'll have a lot of discussion about budget issue papers. There were probably more budget issue papers this year than we've had in the past several years. And just to, sort of reminder, where do those budget issue papers come from? Where are those requests for service enhancements coming from? So some of them are flowing out of master plans. Council approves master plans over the course of the year and then implementing those master plans. So transportation master plan, GRT business plan, paramedic services master plan, all result in annual budget issue papers. So that's one sort of driver. Another is the community continues to grow and the demographics continue to change. In particular, the community continues to age. And so that both growing and aging population continues to put pressure on a number of our services. Areas like Sunnyside, transit, and many other areas, excuse me. And as the services grow, I call it organizational capacity gets strained. So we have, more buildings that we need to maintain. We've got more IT devices that we need to support. We've got more staff that we need to support. So all of those internal support functions that provide the foundation for us to do all the work that we need to do also get stretched. So organizational capacity drives some of those budget issue papers. And then some issue papers were specifically requested by council over the course of the year. And so they're in your package as well. So one of the things I want to emphasize is this is not a wish list, that each and every one of these budget issue papers addresses an important community need, addresses an important organizational need, and you heard through the budget delegations, I think there were delegations speaking to a number of these different issue papers. So there are people in the community who are focused on and dependent on these. And so again, having been through final budget day, I know there is often a significant focus on what's the bottom line, the cost of each of these issues. And I just encourage you, as you're focused on cost and a bottom line, think carefully about the value of each of these service enhancements. Don't just think about the cost, because each of these, as I said, is meeting an important community need. And the last point I want to make is, I talked back in December about uncertainty, and there continues to be a lot of uncertainty hanging over the region and other municipalities. So there's still uncertainty around federal and provincial infrastructure funding programs, the status, the timing, the process. I would say there's a lot of uncertainty around provincial policies, provincial funding. I suspect we'll know more over the next couple months. Wasn't on that slide back in December, but there's now uncertainty around review of regional governance, plus all of our inputs, interest rates, fuel prices, utility costs. So there's a lot of uncertainty that we as an organization will continue to deal with over the course of 2019, and we'll be back into the 2020 budget before you know it. 7 months from now, we'll be sitting around here trying to work our way through 2020 budget. And so my last encouragement to you is, as you make decisions today, keep in mind 2020 budget will be upon us before we know it. And I just encourage you to avoid sort of short-term solutions that might solve a problem today, but might create perhaps an even bigger problem 7 months from now. So there's my introductory comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Murray. There are no questions.
All righty.
Thanks.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, and welcome to the Region's Budget Day for the 2019 budget. I have a thankfully brief slide deck for everybody today that is designed mainly to help guide Budget Committee through the discussions and the various orders of business that need to take place today that will end in an approved budget for 2019. I thought I would start just by going fairly quickly through a handful of slides highlighting some of the services that the region provides in terms of care for seniors and for children, and supporting over 10,000 housing units and over 9,000 people every month on Ontario Works, and the over 800,000 hours of transit service that we provide, the waste that's collected and processed, 1,700 kilometers of roads, and 54 million cubic meters of water. Cultural services, over 130,000 visits at cultural sites, over 51,000 provincial census tickets administered. We circulate over 400,000 materials at our libraries, and over 80,000 passengers at the airport. From an internal infrastructure perspective, in terms of our own equipment and vehicles, we have over 800 of both when you pull everything together, and we recruit almost 1,500 employees and students annually. Some stats here on both EMS and police services. The EMS call numbers you're certainly very familiar with based on conversations that have happened over the last little while. And so the region's budget, as a result, is significant, covers all of these services, as well as the internal administrative support for those services to be delivered. We've provided for Budget Committee a fair bit of information over the last couple of months, going back to the original presentation on December the 11th. All that information continues to be available for review on our website. And so in terms of what's intended to take place today, we have a number of steps that we're going to walk you through. As you've seen on the agenda, there's a staff report with a number of recommendations in that report. We're going to start with those and walk through 4 or 5 recommended adjustments to the budget, staff recommended adjustments. We then have a recommendation on the library budget, which has been forwarded to Budget Committee for consideration. We'll go through a brief summary of the 5 budget information papers that are included on today's agenda. And at that point, we'll introduce the main budget motion. So this will be the motion that will get the budget onto the floor and then be debated and amended as required by Budget Committee. And that will include a series of motions with respect to the approval of budget issue papers and any other adjustments to the budget. And once that process has been complete, then we'll have an amended motion, And it's that motion that would then get adopted by a budget committee as a recommendation to council. They would approve the operating budget, the 10-year capital program, a variety of changes to our user fees and charges bylaw, and the municipal budget regulation. And then finally, approval of the Waterloo Region Police Services operating budget and capital program. And you'll recall you received a presentation on that budget a couple of weeks ago. So that's the order of business for the next little while. And we're going to start off then with the staff report included on the agenda, which covers a number of different aspects of public transit, including an update on UPass's transit system fare revenue and accessible transportation fees. I'm going to walk through each of those right now. So we provided a report back in January with respect to the Student Choice Initiative, which has created some uncertainty with respect to the future treatment of UPasses. The province is reviewing a variety of fees that are assessed by universities. They're intended to complete that review in order to provide any updates to the rules in advance of the 2019 fall term. And this potentially has impacts in terms of the universal bus pass arrangements that the region currently has with University of Waterloo and Wilfrid Laurier University, and potentially with respect to the proposed new UPass arrangement with Conestoga College. We have completed some initial assessment of the impact if UPasses were no longer, I'll say, allowed to be in place. And we've estimated that the revenue loss in 2019 would be in the range of $1.3 million, annualized to approximately $2.5 million. And so this gives Budget Committee actually a couple of options with respect to the Conestoga College UPass. So we have presented it as a budget issue paper. There are a couple of options as we've set out in the report. One is to take no action on the issue paper, and staff would report back at some point in 2019 once we have a clear understanding of what the province's intent is with respect to these types of arrangements. Alternatively, you could approve the issue paper. This would put the region in a good position to implement the service in time for the fall 2019 term, should the universal bus passes be considered a mandated student fee. And that is the suggested approach by staff or from staff with respect to the treatment of that particular issue paper.
So, Craig, we have a question on that. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I do support the staff recommendation, but I am curious about the likelihood that the fares will be considered a health and safety initiative, which is what I understand is going to be mandated. Do we have some indication that that will be? It seems like a bit of a stretch to me, and I'm wondering what we're basing our feelings that it might go through on.
So there was some early indication, I think, from the province that existing UPass arrangements wouldn't be affected.
I see.
That being said, our current agreements, I believe, expire in 2020. So there would be some question, even if existing arrangements were allowed to be included, what would then happen, effective the fall term of 2020. So we did have some indication that existing arrangements would be allowed to continue. I would say it's been pretty quiet over the last couple of weeks. I'm not aware of any new information that's come available in terms of what direction the province might go.
Okay, thank you.
Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. And just to further add to that, there's councillors around this table that are on Board of Governors for the local universities, and I know they're really grappling with it. And I totally agree with staff recommendation to go forward, assuming that these will be funded and will be considered mandatory. There's really mixed messages coming forth, so I think at this point in time, it's still evolving. I think there's an acknowledgement part of the province that these are legally binding agreements. You look at the GTA, and they have them as well. So I think it's much more pervasive than they may have initially anticipated.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dyer. Oh, sorry, we have another question. Councillor Banovic.
Yeah, just on that, I would certainly be supportive of moving forward with the Conestoga College UPass as well. I think we've worked too long and too hard to get to this point. And quite frankly, the students voted, you know, for all intents and purposes, it was agreed to and implemented before this change in policy. And hopefully the province will see that this one is no different than the ones that exist with the two universities.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Banovic. Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So in light of some of that uncertainty, we've taken a closer look at transit system fare revenue. You may recall going back a couple of weeks, staff had brought forward recommendations on a number of non-tax revenue sources. Those amendments have been made to the budget and are incorporated in the budget position for today. We've had another look at transit system fare revenue. The revenue variance in 2018 was about $2.7 million. In other words, we collected about $2.7 million more than was budgeted in 2018. So it's a good news story in terms of how 2018 finished up. We have incorporated between 1.8 and 1.9 million of that increase already in the base budget. We had also incorporated into the base budget a 3% fare increase effective July 1st. And so the first recommendation on the agenda from today's staff report is to move the effective date of any fare increase from July 1st until September the 1st. Has a relatively minor impact on fare revenue overall, but we think that will be a more appropriate time for any fare increase to be implemented. We do recognize that there are a number of risks with respect to fare revenue within GRT. Again, the UPass revenue presents a bit of a risk, incremental LRT revenue, and the overall impact of all the reallocated service hours. So there's a lot happening on the transit side this year, and we'll obviously report back to committee as we progress through the year in terms of any projected revenue variance. The second recommendation in the report on your agenda then, taking all of these factors into account, staff are recommending that we could increase the 2019 transit fare revenue budget by $200,000. And Mr. Chair, if it works for you in the committee, I'll work through the next three recommendations and then pause at that point.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. So the next set of recommendations in the report relate to accessible transportation service fees. And so the region receives these fees annually from brokers who don't provide accessible vehicles. We take whatever fee revenue is collected and we put it in our accessible transportation service reserve and then bring recommendations forward to committee as to how that money should be used. Approximately $134,000 was collected in 2018. And we have recommendations in the report to do three things. One, allocate $20,000 towards additional taxi script service, $59,000 to fund capital costs relating to the accessible vehicles. So these vehicles are covered in the specialized transit budget issue paper, and recommend using $59,000 towards that funding. And then we would hold the remainder of the funds in the reserve pending a further recommendation from staff. I understand some additional analysis proposals are being worked on, and that would be brought forward for consideration by council during 2019. We also have a recommendation with respect to some additional one-time funding that's recently been announced from the local LIN. Totals about $500,000 for a variety of purposes that are set out in Appendix A in the report. The recommendation is to amend the community services budget by $500,000 funded by this contribution from the LIN with no impact on the 2019 property tax levy. And then finally, a housekeeping amendment to include both operating expenditures and sources of funding relating to the Wellbeing Waterloo Region initiative. You may recall the report had come forward on this initiative in 2018. We had determine the expenditures and sources of funding in 2018. We think this housekeeping amendment is important just to make sure that our budget overall is complete. Again, has no impact on the 2019 levy. And Mr. Chair, I'm going to pause there. That covers the covers the 5 recommendations that are included in the staff report on today's agenda.
So can we have someone move those 5 recommendations? Councillor Galloway, seconded by Councillor Lorentz. Any discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Mr. Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So then moving along, we're generally following the order that each of these matters appears in the staff report and on the agenda for today. So the next item is a referral from the Library Committee. Library Committee met in, I believe, late January and approved a 2019 budget with a property tax levy just under $3 million. It's about a 3% increase over the budget from 2018. And of course, the cost of library services at the region is area rated to the 4 townships. And so, Mr. Chair, there's a recommendation included on the agenda to adopt the 2019 library budget and the 10-year capital program. And I would just add a note that the recommended amount, the $2,985,732, is the amount that we had originally incorporated into our base budget back in December. So this doesn't result in any amendment to the region's budget.
Okay, so moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Foxton. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you, Mr. Dyer.
Thank you. We're going to turn our attention now to budget issue papers. We've had, I would say, a fair bit of discussion over the 3 or 4 budget committee meetings with respect to issue papers. As you're all aware, this is the mechanism, if you will, to approve either new services or enhanced levels of service to existing services. They were provided, there's a summary provided in Appendix B of today's agenda. We've also included in today's slide deck as an appendix a summary of all the issue papers. There are 2 items that actually have no 2019 budget impact as they're funded from capital projects or offsetting revenue increases. And the issue papers included in the summary are generally presented in a staff recommended priority sequence. You've seen this slide, I think, for the last 2 or 3 meetings now, so this is the last time you'll see it. Total impact of all the issue papers is about $6.3 million in 2019, with annualization of another $3.3 million going into 2020. And this is just recognizing that in many cases, approval of an issue paper in 2019 means we provide service for part of the year. And as we go into 2020, we then have to annualize it for the full year. We also will be bringing there's also a recommendation with respect to the police budget. You received a presentation last time. The police budget has been approved by the board with a property tax requirement of $169.5 million. Represents about a 5.2% increase year over year and results in an overall tax rate impact of 1%.
Mr. Dyer, we do have a question. Councillor Urbanovic.
Thank you very much. And I don't know if this is the right time to ask the question or at some other point, but I think this is probably as good of as any time, because some of it is wrapped up into some of the things that Mr. Dyer's presenting, and it's the whole issue of the overall number of FTEs that we're increasing by. And I'm wondering what's our total FTE count right now as an organization?
If you just give us a minute, we'll look it up.
The total, and some of it's funded from capital and some of it's funded from operating, so.
Correct. Yeah, we have various sources of funding, some from capital, some operating, some funded to varying degrees by provincial funding programs, others funded by the user rates.
Right. So you want the total number, the global number?
Yep.
Councillor Benedict.
Yep. Sorry. Approximately 3,059.
Okay.
3059?
3059,
Okay.
roughly.
Approximately.
Give or take 0.3 of a person. So when I look through the various budget issue papers that have been presented over budget, there's a lot of FTE increases happening. I mean, there's 12 in senior services, 12 in paramedics. Don't know how many are associated with transit. 1 in housing, 7 in corporate services, 6 in transportation that I can easily see. There's probably some more in addition to that, plus the police ones. Do we have a total number of FTE increase that we're looking at in this budget?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, I think the number's around 80. We're just going to confirm.
Not including police? Or including police? That
would not include police. The majority of the position increases would relate to 3 areas in particular, which has been the case, I would say, over the last 3 or 4 budgets anyway, and those would be in public transit, mainly for drivers to provide the service, in paramedic services for the paramedics, and for additional resources at Sunnyside Home in terms of the level of care that we provide there. That's been where the majority of the increases have been. So through you, Mr. Chair, if all of the issue papers were approved, it would be about 85 FTEs. Okay.
And I guess that's where I'm going. And to be clear, I'm certainly very supportive of a number of areas where we're increasing in terms of paramedics, senior services, transit, and so on, because I think these are areas where, as a growing community and with more and more older adult population, and with some of the challenges that we know we're experiencing in our EMS service, those are areas, and I mean policing, which is over and above that anyway, so I'm not going to go there, which I support as well. I'm just concerned that in times when we need to grow in all those areas, do we need to necessarily grow as much in some of the other areas? And to see what's almost a 3% increase in terms of our overall staffing in the organization is a lot of new staff. I mean, I don't know at the local level, I don't know any time in my time that I can think that we've ever increased by that significant of a number. And so it's concerning me a little bit. And this has been something that I've noticed over several budgets, and something that I think we need to pay a little closer attention to. I'm not sure that today is the day to dig into it a lot deeper, because it's our final budget day. But it's something that I think we need to, particularly as we go into the 2020 budget, pay a lot more closer attention to. With staff, I know, quite frankly, the grilling that our staff gets from the local council typically for additional FTEs, and we typically don't see that here. And so I'm just wondering if it's something that we need to pay a little more attention to. In terms of the numbers that are there right now, how many months are we covering in 2019 in the budget? Is it 9 months typically, or?
So through you, Mr. Chair, I think it would be fair to say that it varies. I would say for the most, actually no, I shouldn't say for the most part. It varies. For example, paramedic services, I believe, are based for the most part on a July 1st start date. Most of the transit service operators are based on a September 1st service start date. I think the additional personal support workers at Sunnyside are probably 9 months of service, so basically an April 1st start date. So it varies depending on when the additional service level would come into place.
Okay.
There isn't a hard and fast rule, I would say.
Okay. I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Banovic, and I can just maybe add to that. I think that as Mr. Murray kicked off the staff presentation today, is that this is a budget that has many more issue papers in it than we're typically used to. And I can't remember the last time that we added that many FTEs. I think the last budget was maybe 20. And I asked the other question previously also that it's 85, but you know, on the personal support workers, for example, 6 of them, I believe, are funded from the province. And so there's various funding sources. But I think Councillor Banovic does make a good point. That's something we need to look at going into 2020. And I don't know, Cheryl, do you have a breakdown of those 85? How many are transit and how many are paramedics and how many are personal support, which is kind of the 3 focus areas?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are 40.3 in the transit budget issue papers. 12 in the paramedic services, and 11.9 for personal support workers.
So that's almost like 65 of the 80 in those 3 key areas.
The 85.
All right, thank you very much.
Good. Okay, so the in terms of then the status of the 2019 tax-supported budget, basically our starting point for discussions this afternoon would be kind of where we left off on February 6th, adjusted for the 200,000 transit fare revenue adjustment already approved by Budget Committee today. And if all the issue papers and police budget were to be approved as contemplated, that would take us to about a 3.66% tax rate increase and a levy of about $543 million. I'm going to quickly, Mr. Chair, just go through the information papers that were included on today's agenda. There are 5 of them. We'll start off with councillor requests. And again, it wasn't my intention to go into a lot of detail. We had a question last time, I believe, about the amount of funding for subsidized transit programs in the range of $2.2 million. There's a request for additional information on active transportation, in particular, which projects were included as part of the 10-year transportation capital program that relate to active transportation. Total number of new projects is in the range of $89 million over the 10 years, and some additional information with respect to the River Road extension. We reported last time on public engagement. We provided an update of where we were a couple of weeks ago. The public engagement closed on February 9th or 10th, somewhere around there. We had 485 responses, so an increase over what we had in the 2018 budget. So just a couple of highlights here. One, in terms of the general question with respect to balancing the cost of delivering services and the amount that people are taxed, what's your preference? 66% responded in favor of increasing taxes enough to expand or improve services. Another 14% increased taxes just enough to maintain existing services. You recall from the discussion last time that the focus of public engagement was on public-facing budget issue papers, and we had, I'd say, a range of responses. The final numbers are not materially different from what you saw 2 weeks ago, but of course reflects the total number of responses. Again, strong support for personal support workers at Sunnyside for the additional service levels with respect to paramedic services. Excuse me. I'd say a range of responses with respect to some of the transit issue papers, generally strong support for more housing program supports. And then a few others, again, where the responses, ranged, for the most part between 50 and 60% on a number of the transportation and environmental services related issue papers, a bit less support on the economic development side, and relatively strong with respect to some of the environmental and community energy investment strategy issue papers. So we hope that information is helpful for Budget Committee in your deliberations today. We also had an information paper with respect to 2019 POA revenue. And of course, what we've experienced in 2018 was different than what's happened over the last 4 or 5 years. We had a reduction in both general POA revenue and in the large fine revenue as well. And so the highlight of all this, I'm just going to circle it right here. So that's the most important part of this slide. So what this is saying is that in 2016 and 2017, we ended the year about $500,000 favorable within POA administration. So total costs, total revenues, we were about $500,000 favorable relative to budget. In 2018, we're about $500,000 on the opposite side. And this is because revenues didn't hit the revenue targets and expenditures were in excess of the budget for 2018. So as a result, we've left the 2019 revenue figure at the same level as 2018, carries with it a little bit of risk, but we were close. We were within about $125,000 of the target, but we've left that budget the same, and we have made some increases to the POA budget as part of the base budget. Fees and charge bylaw, we've talked about this for the last couple of meetings. We've just highlighted here some of the more significant changes, increase in tipping fees, the 3% transit fare increase. Every year we review all of our fees and charges and have made a number of proposed adjustments for 2019, and this would be part of today's budget approval. And so with that, Mr. Chair, that would bring us to then to the point where the main budget motion would be introduced. And we've replicated it here on slides 37 and 38. The motion is in your agenda package. We're just going to get just one moment, please.
Sure. So while Mr. Dyer is getting the correct number to go in there, what will happen is we'll have a mover and seconder, get the main budget motion on the floor, and then we'll review the committee chair's proposals, and we'll go through those in blocks, I propose, rather than one at a time, because there's over 50 resolutions. There'll be 50 resolutions there, so on. And then that will get us back to a main budget resolution as amended, and that's what we'll eventually end up approving. So, Mr. Dyer?
Yep, so the number we would insert into the main budget motion at this point, basically where we're at right now, would be $367,622,032.
Okay, can I have a mover and seconder for that main budget motion, please? Councillor Galloway, Councillor Jowett. Councillor Galloway, you want to speak to it? No, you're okay? All right, so moved and seconded. So I don't think we're going to call the question just yet, because now we're going to move into the amending it. So if you look at the committee chair's proposal, I'll just kick it off from the top. Just that tax levy number on our sheet was updated as we just moved to the $366 million number. The fair revenue adjustment that's already included in the base, we approved that just minutes ago. And then page 1 and 5, the first two ones there, they'll be accommodated within our main budget motion. So once we approve the budget motion as amended, 1 and 5 will be included, so we don't need to take any action on those two. And so then if we go into the recommendations themselves, we'll go to block 1, and I'll ask Councillor Clark to please move them.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move Block 1, the community services items. These include the personal support workers. There are 2 requests. One of the things that we've seen with more and more move to support people as they age in their homes is that people who are coming into long-term care require increasing supports. So this is simply trying to meet the needs of the people that we're now serving and provide better client service and safety. There are two paramedics master plan bundles, bundle 1 and 2. I'm moving both of these. Certainly that's been a priority for this council, and as we saw in our public feedback, this is one of the priority items for our community. And I move finally bundle 1 for the increased housing stability system supports, and that includes winter sheltering for next year, as well as additional supports for people on our pass list, which is our chronically homeless population.
Okay, can we have a seconder for that? Councillor Lorentz. So discussion, Councillor Ivanovic.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In looking at the proposal from the committee chairs, I see that the increased housing stability supports bundle 2 is not being recommended for moving forward. And if I go back to that presentation from Budget Day 1, Bundle 2 referred to serving 20 individuals with portable home-based supports and provide additional eviction prevention funding. And I guess it concerns me that that is not being contemplated in moving forward, because I regularly hear all of us around the council chamber speak about the needs in particular for those residents in our community who are in need of supportive housing. And to not include that in my mind is simply continuing to avoid addressing some of the challenges that we're seeing in significant ways in our urban centers in terms of the needs around supportive housing. And I presume in Bundle 2, we're recognizing that we don't have new buildings in place, so we need to look at having roving supports to support these individuals in different locations. So my question to you is, if we wanted to deal with that, do I need to amend this amendment, or do I need to deal with that separately?
I think what I suggest, Councillor Banovic, is that as you rightly point out, on the back of the page there are 3 issue papers we're recommending that we don't approve, and so once we go through the committee chairs' recommendations, if you want to move one of those back in, then that's at the point where you'll be able to recommend that we proceed with that. So I would suggest we deal with those other items at the conclusion of the chair's report.
So my concern would be if we approve everything else, because my funding source, and so maybe I'll just put it on the table now and you can deal with it at the appropriate time. That is one issue. And then the other one is on that back page, the Community Energy Investment Strategy Actions. I'm just wondering if staff can tell me, if that is removed, how does that impact our commitments to a 80% reduction by 2050 and the work that's being done by numerous partners in the region around addressing that work? Because I thought this strategy was part of that, and it was unanimously adopted by council.
So I think I'll let staff look at that, and then when we come back with those 3 items at the end, we'll deal with it then.
Well, no, what I'm saying, Mr. Chair, is my concern is that where I think the funding for those 2 should come from is by actually delaying the hiring in some of these other FTEs that we're bringing forward, the senior services paramedic transit FTEs. So in other words, the other 20, I think if we delay, would allow us to keep that in and move that issue to 2020 in terms of just switching the split between 2019 and 2020 in those areas.
Okay, so you're trying to find a way, if I understand correctly, Councillor Brandon, you're trying to find a way to get it into 2019 without increasing the total that we're recommending at 2.97?
That is correct. And so I'm suggesting the way we can do that is by starting off the hiring in some of those positions a little later in the year.
Okay. So I don't know, Mr. Murray?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I mean, obviously, it's in council's hands, but I would just reinforce one of my comments from my introduction, which is if you do that, you just create a bigger problem in the 2020 budget.
Right. All right. So thank you, Mr. Murray. So one suggestion I might be able to make, well, and I'll let the other committee chairs get in on this as well, but on the energy investment strategy actions, we felt that there were a lot of other energy-related items that we're funding within the budget. The other thing is with the housing stability, we looked at that really closely as well. And it's bundle ones and bundle twos within the issue papers. Bundle ones are the priorities. Bundle twos are less of a priority than what's indicated in bundle one. So when it came to making some tough choices, you'll look at bundle two for GRT, which is budget issue 30. It's under the Planning and Works Committee Block 2. We said that we would defer implementation of April 2020. So our plan is to approve that, but defer it to 2020. So similarly, Councillor Banovic, we might be able to do the same for housing stability. We could say, you know, we're going to approve it now, but we're not going to fund it till 2020. So that way it gets approved, but it starts in 2020.
I guess my concern, Mr. Chair, is, you know, my view is that, you know, if it comes to prioritizing things, I would sooner prioritize bundle two before I prioritize, for example, what looks like 7 IT FTEs in their full amount for the coming year. I think we could delay some of those and still see us do bundle two, which is being proposed here. I mean, surely out of, you know, and without touching senior services and paramedics, out of those 20 FTEs, you know, by delaying them an extra month or two, we can find the extra funding that's necessary to deal with what, quite frankly, is a human needs crisis in our community.
Yes. So I understand where you're coming from, and what I'm going to suggest is that, to what I said originally, we'll deal with the block one, and then staff will look at what that potential might be on the fly here today to see if they can accommodate your request, which is essentially to look at those two programs within the existing funding envelope by delaying some FTE hires. So I don't know if that can be done. But let staff have a look at that, and we'll come back to that at the conclusion of some of these other recommendations. And for you and other members of committee, if there's a particular line item in there that you don't really want or you don't like that we're suggesting to move in, when the block comes up, take it out separately and let's have a fulsome discussion on that particular line item. Okay? All right, so I got a couple other questions or comments. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. And this may actually complicate things, but I'm trying to be helpful. With regards to the two housing bundles, really, I think that the difference that Councillor Urbanovich is talking about is an incremental difference. We're talking about supports to 10 people in bundle one and supports to an additional 20 in bundle two. So maybe it's possible to pull elements of bundle two out in order to meet a greater need without necessarily investing in the entire $312,000. I don't, that's really a question for staff.
So is the question, could we fund bundle 2 at a lesser amount than 312,000?
Well, that's what I'm wondering. If where we're trying to go is how, if we're looking specifically at those supports, which are rent supplement supports and case management supports for people on the pass list, the chronically homeless list, we're looking at the difference between 1 and 30, and maybe we can look at 20 or something like that, rather than maybe those bundles don't need to be two entirely disparate things, but maybe there's a middle position that's more affordable or easier to accommodate.
All right, so let's deal with bundle 2 at the end. All right, so we've got a couple suggestions there on how to deal with it. All right, Chair Edmund.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I certainly appreciate that Councillor Vrbanovich is trying to offer a solution when he's offering an alternative, but I guess I'm not convinced, or I would be interested to hear from staff when we get back to these issues, if delaying those 20 FTEs actually, if the math works, if it equates to being able to fund this with no impact on the percentage increase, because it seems to me that that's another outstanding question. If that appears to be an easy solution, but I don't know that it matches up.
For sure, and let's see if staff's able to come up with something, and if not, we'll just have to deal with it straight up. Okay, so we have bundle 1, block 1 moved and seconded. No further discussion. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, thank you. Block 2, Planning and Works Transit, Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 5 elements to Block 2, all of them, of course, transit-related. We do have a very significant emphasis on transit. We've already heard that in terms of the number of the new FTEs. This is primarily where those FTEs will be coming from. And should we not forget that in addition to these initiatives, we have an LRT system that's going to be up and running in the next little while, and so we're making some great headroads into transit. So the first item is the business plan year 2 bundle, and that is being recommended for approval. We're also recommending bundle 2 be recommended, but we're recommending that this be done as a pre-budget approval for next year. This is similar to what we did 2 years ago with the Ottawa Street I Express route. We could not find our way clear to fund it in the same year budget, so we did do a pre-budget approval, and we're recommending that we do that as well, and showing our commitment to that particular part of the GRT business plan. Of course, there is the Conestoga College UPass, which has been discussed, the second year of the 5-year business plan for Mobility Plus, and the matter of the Woolwich item that Councillor Shantz has brought forward in terms of Kiwanis being the operator. So that's been adopted, and there are some savings associated with that particular operator versus what was originally in the issue paper. So I'll move block 2, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Shantz. We have some discussion. Councillor Foxton.
Thank you. This should not financially affect the budget in any way, but in the 2018 fees in regards to the auxiliary taxi brokers not offering accessible vehicles, we had $134,000. The recommendation was for $20,000 to go to the taxis, taxi scripts. Taxi scripts has a huge shortage. As you know, North Dumfries pays $364,000 for Mobility Plus. The only way we get Mobility Plus is through taxi scripts. We usually hit about $60,000 for the year and then are cut off every time. So $300,000 is going somewhere else. I'm recommending or suggesting that out of that $134,000, we increase taxi scripts to $30,000. Not $20,000, which means that the amount that you're going to put aside in a reserve fund would be $45,000 rather than $55,000. I think it's a small amount, but taxi scripts are not just used in North Dumfries. They're used throughout the region, and there's a limited number of them. And it does tremendously impact North Dumfries. So that's what I'm suggesting.
So, Councillor Fox, are you referring to the motion we passed earlier today about allocation of the 134,000?
I guess I am. I guess I should put it there.
All right.
I didn't know where to put my hand.
Right now you're saying there's 20,000 there. You'd like to increase it to 40?
30.
To 30. And the remaining funds, there were still that would still leave money left over, I guess. So 30,
right
89.
now, as it sits, with everything taken off, the 20,000, the 59,000, it would leave 55,000,
Okay.
and
Right.
I would like to drop that to 45.
Okay, so let's deal with Councillor Galloway's bundle number 2 here. So, and then we'll just come back to that because then we'll have to amend it. That'll change our opening position minusculely, but okay. So, any further discussion on Councillor Galloway's motion? Did I get a seconder for that? Yes, I did. I believe Councillor Schatz. All right. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. All right. So let's just circle back. So you want to amend number 3 that we previously approved, said 20,000 of taxi scripts, you want 30,000. Okay. So, Mr. Dyer, how do you suggest we do that? You got a lot to think about.
So the motion that was approved earlier today was the 3rd recommendation in the staff report.
Yeah.
We had 3 A, B, and C. One was 20,000 for taxi script, one was 59 for issue papers, and leave the rest in the reserve. So if the intent is to now change something that Budget Committee has already approved, I'll certainly look to advice from the clerk on this. I'm wondering if there's a way that a separate motion could be perhaps introduced to...
I think we have to amend the main motion. We're going to amend the main motion anyways. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We have to amend the main motion, but this is not...
So I think
this is not changing the levy.
No. Right.
So I think you can do it as an amendment.
The clerk is advising me we could take that as an amendment right now if we wanted to.
Yeah, let's do it.
Fair enough.
All right. Okay. So Councillor Foxton is moving amendment the taxi script 3A from 20,000 to 30,000. We have a seconder for that. Chair Redmond, any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay. You're welcome. All right. Now, Councillor Galloway, Block 3. Oh, hang on. I got to turn your mic on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are 3 initiatives in Block 3 related to economic development and community sustainability. The economic development initiatives that we are intending to fund, the REAP grant, which I would note is not affected by the levy. It's going to come out of the tax stabilization reserve because it's a time-limited 2-year commitment. And then the Evolve Green funding, which is one of the various initiatives we have for environmental and sustainability matters. And I'll move those.
Okay, moved by Councillor Galloway, Block 3. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Clark. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay, thank you. Councillor Galloway, you're on a roll.
Block 4 is all to do with transportation and asset management matters. And I will move all the various items so noted there. This is where there's some increase in FTEs, although the numbers are relatively small vis-a-vis EMS and transit. But these are, in some cases, these are ones that have been put off from other years. In fact, quite a few of these are holdovers from previous years when we did not approve them. Also move.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Lawrence. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you very much, Councillor Galloway. So Block 5, Admin and Finance Committee from Councillor Clark.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to move the issue papers, admin and finance issues, being the network infrastructure, security and support, the conversion of one FTE from a temporary to a permanent position, that's in facilities, the delivery of the corporate technology project, and implementation and ongoing support of asset management systems. As with the previous block, these are some of the FTEs that were discussed.
Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Foxton. Okay, Councillor Verbanovic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I think this is probably the place where I would move an amendment. So the $552,000 that's there as the 2019 amount for corporate services, if we were to fund the $312,000 for housing, would still leave $240,000 for those positions, with the rest to be annualized in 2020. And I think when I look at this issue and I look at the scope of the problems that we're having in our communities, we know that there is a significant number of people that are in need of supportive housing. Is 30 going to solve the problem on its own? No, but does it mean that 30 more people are going to be getting support that don't have it now, and will be, maybe 10% on, I think, based on some of the numbers we've talked about in the past, 10% closer to addressing some of those citizens in our community who are the ones who need help the most? The answer is yes, and these are the citizens that we're hearing about in Cambridge, the citizens we're hearing about in Kitchener, and so on. And the implication would be that not that we're not supporting the corporate services positions, but that we would hire them a little later in the year. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, while that is in theory what we're passing, what we would pass with an amendment. It's also up to staff at the end of the day to, in their capabilities as professional managers of the organization, if they feel one of those positions really needs to start a little earlier and they delay another one somewhere else in the organization a little later, they play around with those kinds of things all the time in terms of making those adjustments. And so the amendment that I would like to make, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Clark's motion is that we approve we approve those positions, but only 240,000 of it in 2019, and that the other 312 go towards bundle 2 of the supportive housing, and so that, I think, is the proper process. It's an amendment to a motion, and so I'd move it, and I'd look for Councillor Shantz has told me she would be prepared to second it, so she can confirm that if that's still the case, and then I'd also ask for a recorded vote.
Okay, so there's an amendment. We need a seconder for the amendment. We have a seconder for the amendment, Councillor Shantz. Okay. So I've conferred with the clerk, and the clerk has said that it is in order as long as we understand what Councillor Verbanovic is proposing. and I think we got that one covered. So I'll allow the amendment to proceed. So is there any discussion on the amendment? Chair Redmond.
I guess I would just, through you to staff, and I don't know if it's Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, I'd like to hear their take on this amendment and how it impacts. I mean, if you look at the policy paper, it does talk about what would happen if it's not recommended. I guess I'd just like to hear if that rationale still stands.
I'm going to do the wise thing and punt to the expert. Jennifer Murdoch-Martin can actually speak to this. It is a scalable model. The bundles are scalable, and I believe that as long as we keep them in blocks of 10 clients, that we're okay, but Jennifer can speak to it more fully.
Thank you.
Welcome, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you. You're right, it's a box of 10. There will be greater need for affordable housing and for these units, so 30 units will not meet the demand. We will be looking for as many units as we can possibly get. So it's at the expense of another budget issue paper, so I don't know that that's fair comment here. But yes, if we could have budget 2 approved and the additional 20 units, we would be grateful for them.
Okay, yeah, but Chair Redmond had the floor here. Do you want to follow up with that, Chair Redmond, or?
So I guess my question was, on the issue paper, it says if there are repercussions if it's not supported as part of the budget.
So 20 fewer households will have the opportunity to be housed through this funding.
And there is the capacity to add 20 or 30 households?
As far as units in our stock, we are still looking to get more units available to rent through the private market. But there are households in need of it, yes.
And I understand that, but there was a public announcement put out to private renters to say be part of this program. So I'm assuming because that went out, I guess I'm just asking, is there capacity for the uptake if this is approved to realize this kind of support in 2019?
That's right, and that was part of the recruitment for new landlords, just to make sure that we have the capacity for in new landlords, in new units to accommodate not only these 10 new units through the bundle 1 or 20 through bundle 2, and the other 30 units that were announced earlier in January, February through the Reaching Home project. So we will always need new landlords as part of our program.
And I'm probably flogging this, but yeah. So there is...
Right now we do need more units, yes.
The need is there. Is the capacity there to fulfill the need?
Not at this time. We are searching to get more landlords to be available to participate in the program. And we're always looking for new landlords.
And I would just present to council that was part of the rationale why we went with bundle 1 and not bundle 1 and 2, recognizing that it may not be realistic to put this kind of funding in when there hasn't been that kind of uptake. The need is another piece of the equation, but the uptake isn't there at this juncture, correct?
At this time, we're actively recruiting new landlords to participate.
Okay, thank you, Chair Redmond. So, Councillor Banovic, I have a couple other speakers. Do you want to go first, or do you want to wait until the end? All right. Councillor Clark.
Thanks. This is just a reflection on the comment that we are maybe just punting a budget issue into 2020. I just want to clarify, and maybe I'm being unreasonably optimistic, and I probably am. What we're dealing with right now is a backlog of about 300 people on the supportive housing wait list. So we're putting millions of dollars a year in investments into trying to reduce that backlog. We have set ourselves a goal of doing that by next July. I'm not going to put Douglas on the spot and ask him what he thinks about that, but certainly we are not anticipating always having 300 households that will need to be housed. So I don't think we're going to assume that our needs are going to be as great next year and the following year, well, maybe next year, but going forward as they are this year.
Okay, Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Redmond indicated that was part of our reasoning for deferring Bundle 2 is whether or not it could actually be expended in the period of time. Not that the need isn't there, but whether or not it could actually be expended. The question I had, Mr. Chair, though, was really of staff. If we went along with the current amendment, that would reduce bundle or block 5 by 2/3 or so. Logistically, can what Councillor Urbanovic is suggesting actually occur, or is, in terms of the hiring, are there any issues? I mean, is that doable? It just means delaying hiring for I would suggest that, you know, the better part of the year for most of these positions.
Mr. Dyer?
Yeah. Excuse me, and through Mr. Chair, I think that's the main point that I would like to make for these positions in particular. They're assumed from a budget perspective in 2019 to start mid-year. If more than half of the funding for these positions is removed, then we're going to be looking at starting dates, I would say, certainly into October, certainly into the fourth quarter, in some cases potentially November. So in terms of the benefit that we would receive, and through the long list of IT-related projects that we need to get at, then I think that takes most of our capacity away, certainly for 2019.
And so thanks for that. So it is doable. It's delays various tasks and projects. But I want to go back to the matter of the housing bundle 2, and I'm not sure if Jennifer can answer this or whether or not it can be answered by anybody, but if we approve bundle 2, will we spend bundle 2? So there's no sense approving bundle 2 if we can't spend it.
That would be an additional 30 units, and I would say that, yes, we could certainly have 30 units online through this year to spend that money. So, through any form of housing, through in situ with existing or new engagement with new landlords. But okay. Yes, we can.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Banovic.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to staff for the questions, because I think they have been helpful. When I go back to the issue paper and look at those implications, the issue paper talks about the local housing stability system, the fact that we've seen an increase of about 40% in overall waiting list for affordable housing, and between 250 to 300 people more than last year, and about 40 of whom are still living outside. And 30 people is not clearly going to solve the problem, but getting those people either into housing with rent supports, or getting them support so that they can be prepared to move into housing as it becomes available, in my mind, for some of those who are at greatest need in our community, needs to be a priority for us. I come from an IT background at the municipality. I understand the importance of IT, but the job of us around this horseshoe is to balance these competing priorities, and at the end of the day, the buck stops with council, and we make the tough decisions. So I think Ms. Murdoch made a good response where she said, this is one budget competing against another one, and absolutely, and that's why we as a council need to make the decision. And for me, this year, that balance, in light of everything that we're experiencing in the communities, needs to rest on the side of the human resources element, and not human resources, but the human element, and putting the supports in that place and delaying the other just a little bit longer. If we didn't have any staff in IT department, it'd be a different thing, but I'm sure we have a well-resourced IT department already. And so, it'll just mean reprioritizing things a little longer and a little differently.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Vanovic. I thought you had the last word, but a couple others have jumped in. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I guess because we're doing this on the fly and I'm making notes all over, I just want to make sure that I've got this clear. So in Bundle 4, that Councillor Galloway put forward, 106 is traffic signaling technology option 1 and 2, and it doesn't have an impact on this year's budget because it comes out of capital, as I understand. I'm just seeking for clarification. This is part part of the presentation that we had from MyoVision, correct? And this is part of the technological working smarter and looking at traffic that has environmental impacts, that does figure into active transportation and smarter intersections between walking, cycling, and cars. Have I got that right?
Yes, you do.
So then can I also ask, the FTE for infrastructure analysis, transportation planning, and corridor management, are they not connected to that, or am I making a false assumption that those somehow are connected to us becoming smarter and higher tech and how we deal with all those modes of getting around the region?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so those two positions I would say are not directly related to the Advanced Traffic Signal Technology Project.
Are any of them
dealing with different issues?
That would be reduced? They're not connected to that?
Not to my knowledge. Perhaps Mr. Schmidt can help out.
I know, but she's asking about Block 4 to see if there's a relationship between 4 and 5.
The FTE for the construction and utility relocation permits in the corridor management area, that FTE is largely to deal with the increasing number of permits for construction, whether that be from utility or from development, where we need to manage the road and provide permits and approvals on getting the work done. So we're just seeing with increased construction, increased amount of roads, and increased need for that service. The traffic signal technology, that is, as was stated before, is related both to the MyoVision and also to the fact that we simply are increasing the number of traffic signals. I think we have, I can't recall the number, but it's a significant number more traffic signals. I believe it is in the issue paper. And we simply require more staff to be able to manage those traffic signals.
And there's three more staff for that.
Yes.
That's issue paper 60.
Yeah. The MyoVision, to be clear, does not actually reduce. It provides some reductions in staff, as is noted in that issue paper. MyoVision is largely a data collection process. It does not actually make any changes to the traffic infrastructure, the signals. So we would use the MyoVision to collect data more frequently. Currently, we're reviewing corridors about every 5 years. We would be able to do that much more frequently, but it would increase the number of staff we need to basically make adjustments based on that data and to analyze that data.
Okay. All right. Councillor Jaworski.
My question is of staff just regarding the items. So there's 4 items in Block 5 and the Bundle 2 that we're discussing as well. These are the budget impacts that we have in front of us for 2019. I'm just wondering if you could refresh our memories on the budget impacts of each item for 2020. So example, are some fully funded and some not?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So with respect to the housing, issue paper, Bundle 2 has been costed at $312,000 as the impact in 19. That would be a half-year impact. So annualized $624,000 into 2020. And if I understand from a conversation with Mr. Bartholomew Saunders, that bundle is scalable. In other words, a portion of that 312 could be approved, half, for example. So there's the ability to work within. It's not, I believe, an all or nothing. Okay. With respect to the remaining issue papers on in block 5, so the network infrastructure security and support. So it would be an additional 80. So for the network infrastructure security and support would be an additional $81,000 in 2020. For the second one, which is the temporary to permanent conversion, another $19,000 in 2020. The project delivery resources, an extra $146,000 in 2020. And for the asset management and ongoing GIS support, an additional $41,000 in 2020.
Thank you. My concern is really the fact that we're pushing, we're doing good here, but we're pushing some stuff out to, so far at the end of this year, we're actually pre-approving 2020 budget items for some of these things by making this change. And I'm just wondering if maybe there's an option to do half of the bundle 2 and make it more scalable so that we actually have some of these things actually starting in September as opposed to literally weeks before the end of the year.
Councillor Banovic, will you take that as a friendly amendment?
Well, if I can reply to it, I think this comes down fundamentally to what are the priorities and values of us as a council. You know, we've all sat through hours and hours of meetings dealing with safe injection sites. And one of the things that continually gets talked about is the need of supportive housing that goes along with that and the supports that people are going to need. And we've all said, well, you know, if we're going to go with safe injection sites, we're committed to it. We're going to put the dollars there to make these things happen because we know it's important and we need to move forward. Well, this is our choice and our opportunity to make that choice and demonstrate it in a demonstrable way, or simply, you know, punt it off to another year and hope that somehow this is miraculously going to get better. Well, folks, you know, I challenge you to come for a walk with myself or Mayor McGarry in our downtowns, in our city cores, and see some of the challenges that we're dealing with. See some of the challenges that organizations that service these citizens in our organization are dealing with, and I'm trying to be cautious here in terms of how I word that. It's, you know, we're only going to be dealing with 10% of the problem if we get to 30 people. That's still 90% that aren't being dealt with. So at some point, we just got to say, you know, some of these other things that we want, you know, maybe aren't needs, and supporting these individuals are. And so I'm not prepared to support it as a friendly amendment. I really think that you know, we're still going to put $240,000 into the administration and finance list, and how they divide that up, I think, you know, is going to be up to staff to decide how they do that. And I would strongly urge council to be consistent with the messaging we've given out in the past.
Okay, Councillor Clark, and then we'll call the question on the amendment. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, I don't have the email in front of me. I just one point of clarification and then one request for clarification. This 10 units or 20 units or whatever is not all that's out there. I think we have 100 units out there already that with subsidies. It's certainly not enough, but we're trying to increase this number incrementally. But there are 100 out there already, and there are other groups working to try to build on that. So that's my point of clarification. Just my request for clarification. I think it's the transportation planning FTE in Block 4. Is that the active transportation planner that we've previously discussed? That's that person? Okay, so it's not. Thank you.
Okay, so just to reiterate, so the amendment is that we reduce Block 5 by a total of $312,000 and use that money to fund Bundle 2 for housing stability support programs. Is that correct, Councillor Banovic? Okay, so, and you've requested a recorded vote? All right, Madam Clerk.
Vote.
Yeah, I voted. Just so you know, I voted against it because I didn't think it was achievable. Supposedly, I voted against it. Just record mine as a negative. I voted against it. Okay, so that amendment carries. Oh, I just saw it. Sorry. I'm just seeing it. Sorry. Sorry. Is that good enough? All right. So, there it is. So it carries. Now on the main motion, it's been moved and seconded. So all those in favor? We have to vote for the main motion, folks, in order for this to pass. So all those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, so we've passed Block 5 as amended to reflect the reduction in Block 5 and the add-on for Housing Stability Bundle 2. All right, so now we're going to move on to Section D on the committee chair's recommendations. I ask Councillor Jowett to move that.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to propose a motion to accept the revised budget position, including the issue papers as follows. Item D, I am actually called Block D, aren't I? I'm not really a number here, so Block D. Am I on Block 6? Okay. So the other committee chairs proposed adjustments, RTMP phase-in final urban levy increase over 2 years at 4%. So we're trying to be efficient with our resources and balance the incentives to encourage transportation usage. All of the 2019 fuel savings to the tax levy, 358,000. Fund incremental SWIFT contribution from reserves, and then gapping and other compensation adjustments as noted.
Okay, do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Erb. All right, any discussion? So Councillor Foxton.
Can someone just tell me about the fund incremental SWIFT contribution from reserves? So before it was coming from the levy, now we're doing it out of reserves? Is that clarification?
It'll still be funded, but not out of operating. It'll be out of reserves.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. We're ready for the question? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay, thank you very much. So now I think that brings us back to the main motion, Mr. Dyer, as amended. And Cheryl, could you confirm what tax rate we're looking at now? So there we are, we're at our 2.97. Including police. I see it, just 1 second. Okay, just before that, we have a question. Councillor Shantz.
Thank you. Can you tell us what the carryover impact to 2020 is with what we've done? Do you have that handy, or?
You mean the annualized costs
yes,
for everything that we've done?
That's what I meant, yes.
Yeah, and so through you, Mr. Chair, if we go back to the issue paper slide we showed, before we had annualization, I think in the $3.4 million range. Most of the issue papers have been approved, so it's going to be in that range.
In that range.
Okay. Okay. So here's the main budget motion that we need to amend, and we have a number to go in there now, Mr. Dyer? Yep. So the first clause of the main budget motion, the revised number that should go in there is 370,270,409. So 370,270,409. So that's the regional component of the levy, excluding police, inclusive of the issue papers that you have approved today. Okay. All right, and then I'm just wondering, we have a couple of highlighted items there that maybe I get a couple of my colleagues to comment on. Councillor Galloway, can you comment on the first highlight one there where we've kind of carved out active transportation from the capital budget?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is something I requested at one of the original budget meetings. I think we've all agreed, and we'll probably agree even more when we get to the strategic planning exercise, that active transportation is a very significant issue that we want to prioritize over the next period of time, indefinitely, I suppose, and that we did not have a specific line item in our capital program that identified active transportation infrastructure. It was buried within every project budget, and I think we needed to identify it. So I thank staff for pulling that all out and now having a separate line. And as you can see, we do have a substantial amount of investment planned over the next 10 years in active transportation. I would possibly continue to ask whether or not it's possible to have the operating budget so identified as well. There is maintenance and some operating costs associated with active transportation, and it might be good to have that identified as well. But this is certainly a good start to show our commitment to active transportation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Galloway. And the other items with respect to the transit fare, I wonder, Councillor Clark, if you could just comment on that.
Thank you. I was really pleased to see in a report a month or so ago that we were pretty much on par with other communities in Ontario in terms of our regular transit fares. There was an average, and we were right there. If I read the report correctly, though, we were significantly higher than the average for subsidized fares. And working from memory, I think we were anywhere from about 20 to 33% higher, depending on the fare package we were talking about. So I know that we have our transit subsidy pilot going on right now, and I am hoping that it results in some significantly improved subsidy programs that we can, for one, extend to more people, and also make a little more meaningful. I wasn't happy with a 3% fare increase, not because I thought that the full fare users couldn't handle it, but because there are too many low-income people currently who are paying the full fare because they don't qualify for, or there's a wait list for subsidies. So I was comfortable approving the 3% transit fare increase, knowing that we will have the results of our pilot study before this actually takes effect, so that we can revisit it if necessary. Is that the comment you were looking for, Chair? Because I honestly, for a minute, I wasn't paying attention.
Well done, Councillor Clark. Well done. All right. And so that is the main budget motion as amended. And so the main budget motion was moved by Councillors Galloway and Jowett. So I just want to check with you that the amendments are considered friendly. And if so, we'll call the question for the main budget motion as amended. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried unanimously. We have a budget. Thanks, everyone. Except now we have to do police services. But
Exactly. Yep. Well
but
done.
we do have a budget for regional services.
Yep.
Okay,
absolutely.
Mr. Dyer.
Yep. So just give us a moment here. We're just trying to get the right slides. There we go. Perfect. So there's another final set of motions that were included in the agenda package for today relating to the Waterloo Regional Police Services budget, which is to approve the 2019 police services budget as recommended by the board back in January, as well as the 2019 capital program and 2020 to 2028 capital forecast. Okay. Chair Redmond.
Thank you, Chair Strickland. I will move the police budget as displayed.
Okay, we have a seconder, Councillor Vanovic. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Okay, so now we have a budget, including police.
We do.
Okay, so I'd like to say thanks to staff and also to the committee chairs and of course to council, but staff weren't the only ones working on the weekend. We worked diligently as chairs and in conjunction with staff to come to this budget. And I'd like to point out that at 1.97 for regional programs, that's at or about the rate of inflation. So I think that is a really, really good number. And I thank staff for all the work and my colleagues as well in achieving, I think, what is a very reasonable budget. Councillor Galloway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also want to take the opportunity to thank you for leading us in this regard. The committee chairs did have some challenges in terms of getting together. We all had vacations of some sort or another. It was quite interesting, and we did it largely on the fly. But you've provided a lot of leadership to this particular process, and I do want to thank you on behalf of council. I also want to take the opportunity, there might be one more motion that we should consider, and that is to make Angela Hinchberger an honorary member of the Budget Committee. I told her before that she has to come back every year for this day, just for old time purposes. And I think we should acknowledge, although her retirement isn't tomorrow, this will be her last budget. And in my 25 years here, she has certainly served us very, very well.
All right. Hear, hear. Last budget. I can tell Angela is missing the budget process already. Councillor Harris.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question on Councillor Verbanovic's motion with regards to Block 5. Will there be a mechanism as to which Council will be informed in terms of how that 312 is carved out of, the Block 5 by chance, or?
I think the intention was to leave it to staff to figure out the best way to do it.
And then I guess just picking up on additional comments that Councillor Bevanovic raised about the increase in the number of FTEs, I'm hopeful that we have some sort of, we don't just leave that where it stood. We have a conversation perhaps and where we go ahead of 2020. That would be my only comment, that I would support that initiative.
Yeah. Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, this is for Angela. In response to Councillor Galloway, now's the time to use my advice.
Okay. I think that's it. So we need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Foxton, Councillor Nowak. All those in favor? As carried, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We have council right away.